Hello, and welcome to the Brew Hoop Podcast. I'm Adam Paris, co-managing editor of brewhoop.com. We are back. It's been a long time for all of us, for Kyle, for Riley, and myself. We've been waiting, just percolating on the content. If you saw the outline for this week's episode, you would know we've been spending weeks and weeks coming up with what we want to talk about. But it's really good to be back. It's good to see your guys' faces again. Just generally, how are you?
Don't have COVID yet, so I'm doing all right. Hanging in there up here in Minneapolis. So I'm excited sort of about basketball being back. I mean, it's still sort of a weird situation with the bubble and scrimmage games and kind of figuring out the whole balance between all that. But I'm doing okay.
Yep, I'm good too. Also no COVID. Watching a lot of soccer. Liverpool won the league, so that was great. Ford Madison just came back. But yeah, I still don't love the idea of sports coming back, but it is what it is.
Yeah, Kyle, weren't you? I saw you and your son got some film time big time on NBC Sports or something, right?
We did. So because there's no fans at the stadium, they're deciding to do different supporter group, fans throughout the country. So that one weekend, it was Madison, Wisconsin for Liverpool, and I was a part of it. Sterling was sitting on my lap when that happened. So, yeah, it was a good time. He has now been on TV apparently twice. So he's a bigger star than I'll ever be.
Well, we'll have to wait till he makes his first podcast appearance because, you have all of these in the bank. So we'll see if he can match up to that. Well, as you guys said, it is kind of weird to have sports back. There's obviously there's going to be lots of caveats aside. I think we made all of our opinions pretty clear about how we feel about trying to approach this virus back on our previous podcast. You can listen back to those. But for the purposes of this, we're going to talk about basketball because basketball is back. We have the Milwaukee Bucks back in our lives. It took so far we have 2 scrimmages under the belt. First one kicked off against the San Antonio Spurs. The second one was against the Sacramento Kings. Bucks win both of those, which is great. Get back in the useful shape of destroying other teams. We'll get into the nitty gritty of those a little bit later, but just generally, guys, to this point in the bubble, almost all of Milwaukee is there. We were just waiting on Eric Bledsoe, who showed up after testing positive for COVID-19. Hopefully, he's feeling okay. He is in the bubble. He returned to practice last week, and then Pat Connaughton is now en route as well via, I think that was shared on social media on Saturday, July 25th. So we should have the entire Milwaukee Bucks squad down there. Hopefully Pat Connaughton and Eric Bledsoe are okay. Hopefully their families are okay. But just generally, Riley, it does seem like compared to other teams, I haven't paid a ton of attention to other teams, but it does feel pretty fortunate that already the Bucks have basically their entire squad down there.
It does, and I think you can even look at these scrimmages as, obviously going to be warm-up games for everybody, but it's an interesting because guys like Pat and Eric are those 2 guys, and whatever happened to Cam Reynolds, he's just left him stranded. All right, good season, Cam. See you later. So besides that, I think it was valuable, yes, to have the whole squad together, and we'll have these 8 games, and because Milwaukee has a pretty much insurmountable lead for the top seed, there'll be a lot less pressure for Eric and Pat to rush back, or they'll have plenty of time to get warmed up and kind of get a feel for the rest of the team again. But on top of that, it gives us a good opportunity to see 2 scrimmages to see Dante run a lot of point guard, or even Frank Mason got some run at the end of the Spurs game, for example. So I think it is fortunate. I'm not sure how many other teams are missing a lot of critical players. I know the Clippers, for different reasons, are missing a couple of guys, but it sounds like they'll also be pretty much back by the time the seeding games are done. So far it seems like the whole bubble experiment, not only for the Bucks, but for everybody else, is going relatively well. And again, it'll just kind of force the team to experiment a little bit, which is not a bad thing for the Bucks, I don't think.
Yeah, I've been surprised by how well the bubble has been going, just candidly. I think they came out and said there were no positive tests last week, which for me was surprising, Kyle.
Yeah, I figured watching the other sports league, I know NWSL for women's soccer, they had their bubble over in Utah. And since they had a whole team drop out because a few players tested positive before the whole thing started, but once everyone got to the bubble, it was fine. And Major League Soccer had a few hiccups at the beginning, but they're also in a bubble in Orlando. So it seems like things have gotten better for all the, because I know like WNBA, NBA, and MLS are all in Orlando with their respective bubbles. How that's turned out, it has surprised me just because, you would think there would still be one test, whether it was a false positive or not. There would be someone that would have tested positive. And yeah, it seems like it is working when players follow the rules, which is what we were not sure was going to happen, because as much as we know they're adults, at the same time, all it takes is for one person to break it and they get it, and then it spreads to everyone else, and then we're hitting a mess, and that's not including the Disney employees as well. So good that the bubble's still looking to be pretty efficient and effective. Maybe that could be the model most other leagues in the country go towards in the future. If you have 4 sports leagues that have done a bubble and all 4 can successfully start and finish without any problems. In terms of other teams, it seems like Milwaukee had 2 players, and while one of them is a starter, it doesn't seem as dire. Thankfully, it was early enough, and Bledsoe is back practicing. While you look at the Nets, and they seem to have a few guys that have tested positive and have left the bubble. Notable love of the pod, Michael Beasley being one of them. The Lakers seem to have, it seems like every team hasn't returned to full strength yet. And that's, whether it's like the Houston Rockets where they had, Westbrook tested positive, or you have the Pacers who lost Sabonis within within days of being there. So I think it's going to be interesting to see moving forward how many of those teams that are back and able to hit their stride by the time these 8 games happen. For the Bucks, because they have such a large lead, and getting the number 1 overall seed doesn't matter since there's no home court advantage. I wonder how long it'll take them to get up to speed, and if Bud will make any of those changes that he'll need to. But experimenting is always good. Seeing Frank Mason get some play time is always a fun time, because I always think he could do well, and then sometimes I get a harsh reality that that's not the case. DJ Wilson still can't get playing time unless it's a blowout. So that's nothing has changed at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I felt bad for Frank Mason when he checked in, and he got an inbound pass, and it was stolen from him right away. Just had his pocket cleanly picked, which is, a harsh welcome to the high NBA life after his MVP G League season. Shout out to him for that. But I'm really curious to see, do you have any fears, Riley, about Eric Bledsoe and Pat Connaughton, reacclimating themselves to the team? I guess really the only notable fear that's possible is lingering effects from the virus that we don't know about.
Yeah, it would be more so probably stemming from, again, like cardio, conditioning, that sort of stuff, where you have guys like Giannis, or you guys who don't have COVID, where they, even in like the Spurs game, they kind of seem a little winded just because this is the first competitive minutes. And so I know Eric was saying that he didn't really work out. He was just playing a lot of Call of Duty, which is fine. I'd probably do the same thing if I had COVID, I guess. And that's a good way to stay united with the teammates, which is good. But it might take him a little bit of time to get back up to speed. And like Pat, I'm not as worried just because his role is more interchangeable with a lot of the other guys on the bench. And so maybe he'll be able to leap a little bit less at guys and like totally whiff trying to block it or whatever. But I think I'm not too worried, because it feels like the 8 games, as long as there aren't serious lingering effects, and it sounds like both of them didn't have too bad of symptoms, in theory, that should be enough to kind of get him to game shape. And then again, the first round, presumably whoever the 8th seed is going to be, the Bucks are going to blow them out anyhow. So that's like another 4 games you kind of have to get into shape. And so I think with all that in front of you, again, as long as there's no real issues, I don't see it as a real downside for the Bucks, in that it'll be a lingering problem throughout the playoffs, but any more than like, any sort of nerves or pressure or anything like that Eric might normally feel, or kind of not being hot shooting like Pat, something along those lines.
I think the other thing that I think is beneficial to the Bucks, and I know this happened a little bit with the Clippers, but I think it's most notably with the Lakers, is they've lost a few guys. So Rajon Rondo, of course, I think he hurt his hand, but
thumb,
either way,
I think.
yeah. So he's out like 6 to 8 weeks. So theoretically, maybe not to the conference finals. He would come back. Avery Bradley, of course, opted not to come into the bubble for very valid reasons. The Bucks didn't really have anyone like that who chose not to come to the bubble. If they didn't want to come to the bubble, I would have totally understood. But thankfully, everyone wanted to come in and try and take this championship. And then I think the other concern, obviously, is with these guys having to work out at home or potentially not working out at times. There is the fear of injuries as people come back to the court. And so far, so good in terms of the limited minutes that the Bucks have played. Wesley Matthews had a little bit of a scare in the Kings game where he seemed to bump knees with Harry Giles, but he left the court, apparently asked Bud if he could come back in later, so thinking he's probably fine. And then the only other potential injury was Thanasis, who I think entered the concussion protocol or was being checked out for a concussion. So those are really the only two big injuries, but so far so good. And just hopefully as they ramp up the minutes, Kyle, there aren't any other further injuries that rear their head with the Bucks getting back up to speed.
Yeah, with the Spurs game, it was getting to the fourth quarter, and I think there was 7 minutes left. The Bucks were up 18-something points, and I was kind of thinking, all right, Giannis is still in, the starters are still in, let's try and get them out. And I think a minute later, but I got Giannis out, but Brook was still in. I was like, okay, they don't need to play this much. They got this in the bag, and I think that's going to be – otherwise, the rotation has been good. For what Bud's doing, he's not trying to run them into the ground too much. He's still, in terms of a 10-minute quarter, load managing them pretty well. So you just hope that there isn't a muscle injury, primarily just because their bodies haven't been used to using a couple of those muscles for months now. So that's going to be the bigger concern, whether it's a shoulder or a hamstring or a calf, that those don't flare up. The good thing about that break was Giannis coming back 100% healthy, because right before everything stopped, he had that knee issue, which it was good for him to kind of rest. And now he made that joke, like, did you really think I didn't, have a basketball and was able to get some shots in throughout that whole time, which I thought was pretty funny, because it seemed when Giannis said he didn't shoot a basketball, I was like, that. No, there's no way. There's no way he, out of all people, did not try and get as much practice in as possible. But it's good that, it seems like they're still healthy. It seems like they're getting back into shape, and there hasn't been a major injury. Hopefully Thanasis doesn't have as bad of a concussion or a concussion at all, because that was a pretty scary fall that he had at the end of the Spurs game. And yeah, with Eric and Pat, it's just more of a cardio-wise. I doubt they didn't work out when they tested positive. I don't know how much working out they did even prior, and now they're going to have to slowly integrate and get back to it, and we don't know the effects of COVID. So hopefully it's not too serious of lingering effects for them. But I think overall this is as good as it can be for the first 2 games of scrimmage.
And I think on top of that, in addition to guys coming back, and especially Kyle, you said Giannis was a big one. I thought it was really impressive. And again, it's only 2 scrimmage games, so we can't take it and extrapolate it out to the entire playoffs during the bubble or anything. But I thought guys like Wes, George Hill, and I think Marvin Williams. I don't know why I'm calling him Marv. Like I'm on first name basis. My guy Marv. They all looked really good, like pretty spry. And I think one of my concerns, more so than Giannis, because he was going to rest up, or like Chris, I'm sure they'd figure out ways to work out or kind of stay in shape. But I think guys who are a little bit older, one of the concerns would be, how did these months, did they either come back and look even more spry, or did they kind of look like, like a Corver in the first game where he looked a little rustier? He still looks like he might disintegrate, or Ersan looks like he's moving slower than ever, which is not exactly great, but he still puts himself in great position, which is, fine and a good way to kind of counteract that. But I thought, especially in these 2 scrimmages, Marvin looked really good with his footwork, I thought, with a lot of, especially offensively, kind of moving around, working in pick and rolls, or working kind of like 2-man game. So I thought for me, that was one of the other big takeaways, was the older guys, at least the ones that presumably are going to get a lot of minutes, look pretty good and look to be in good shape as well.
Yeah, let's talk specifically about that Spurs game. I think it was going to be the more relevant out of the 2 scrimmages, given this only a few of the starters played just one half against the Kings. So against the Spurs, Bucks win 113-92. Giannis ends up with 22 points, just 1 of 5 from deep. Some pretty nasty misses actually from 3, but not out of line for how he shoots the 3 occasionally. 3 of 8 from the free throw line. 5 fouls. He was racking up the fouls. They really wanted to call him that game. Good work on the refs getting their whistles in. Chris, 16 points, 4 of 12. Got to the line 7 times, which was nice. Brooke, 17 points, 3 of 3 from deep for the Elder Lopi. So, I mean, it was a scrimmage game. There wasn't a whole lot to take away from it. I thought the big thing was Giannis still looks unstoppable in transition, going down to the paint. Seeing Brook Lopez hit 3 threes is great. It's hard when it's a small sample size, but it was good that they were going in. I think maybe that's just something that he just needs to see, and maybe his confidence will build up from there. But was there anything significant that stood out to you from that Spurs game, Riley?
I think the biggest thing, and this is kind of a theme that was between the two games, was how decent Chris and Giannis looked, and how they looked independent of one another, and how they looked playing off one another. I thought in the Spurs game especially, there was a lot of pick and roll action that Chris was initiating, and you can kind of see it also in the Sacramento game, where at the end of quarters, they were like, okay, we're just going to try and do the Chris-Giannis pick and roll. And for whatever reason, I mean, it's a pretty simple pocket pass that Chris has to make if they're both charging towards the hoop after actually setting the pick. And so there were a lot of times where Giannis would be laboring, and instead of trying to force the issue and be like, okay, just keep hammering away from outside the perimeter and trying to get a head full of steam, it was like, let's free it up. Let's just get you a wide open dunk, essentially. And then as the game kind of went on, you could see where the Spurs were kind of throwing like a third defender at the pick and roll. And then at that point, it kind of falls down to Chris being able to pick out whoever the open guy is. And there were a couple of times where, like, I think there was a Wes Matthews 3 that came off of a Giannis pick and roll where Chris was able to turn around and get it back to him. And so if that's something, a small fold like that, that is pretty tough for opponents to stop depending on what your personnel is like, it takes the pressure off of Giannis to have to deal with 3 defenders independently, and it kind of, again, forces opponents to pick their poison. And then it kind of comes down to, is Chris comfortable with trying to make like mid-rangers or finding whoever the open guy is? And so that, from the Spurs game especially, was something that I was like, okay, that's pretty interesting, because we don't see it all that often. I think you said before we recorded that the Bucks run the 3rd least amount of pick and roll action in the entire league, which that's just the way that they play, which is fine. And obviously it works given the regular season. But if that's another small thing that they can kind of work on throughout these seeding games, you put your 2 best players in position to work off one another and read the situation, trust them, have them be confident in that ability. I think that's something that would be positive build off going on to the future, because it's really tough for an opponent to stop.
Yeah, Kyle, what stood out to you from the Spurs game?
I think what stood out to me was that especially in the first half, the defense that Milwaukee was having was as up to speed as it was very up to speed. They were very active. They were moving around. They were still forcing this. And the Spurs are a team that likes taking mid-range jump shots, so it's kind of tough to know for sure if that was by design or if that was them limiting the Spurs to it. But forcing a lot of mid-range jumpers from the Spurs. Defensively, they were flying around the court. Marvin Williams is diving for balls. Giannis is still getting hands on it. Dante is still typical Dante in the passing lanes. So I think defensively, Milwaukee looked as good as they did, and offensively was tough. You mentioned that Giannis was 1 of 5 from 3, and especially early on, those were pretty bad misses, but everyone was struggling to hit a 3-point shot that wasn't Brook Lopez or Marvin Williams in the first half. Even Kyle Korver, I think, airballed a 3. So I think the offense still needed some time to gel, and then you saw by the third quarter it was starting to show signs of life again. But I think defensively, it seemed like Milwaukee was picking it right back up, and that's a good thing, because that's going to rely more on legs and mentally trying to stay as focused as possible and make sure you don't get backdoor cut or something. So I think that's what I noticed, especially in that Spurs game, was how the defense looked throughout all 4 quarters, while Milwaukee's offense kind of struggled in the first half. But in the third quarter, they're able to get that one run that they needed to kind of blow the game open and seal it by then. Also, what I was relatively impressed with was Marvin Williams himself. he looked, Riley mentioned that his footwork was good and he was in good positions. He was getting a couple jump shots in. He just looked like someone that actually benefited from this break, maybe getting to know his teammates, feeling more comfortable, not having to learn the whole system on the fly if there was, games still going, compared to now he's had some time to sit down, maybe talk it over with the coaches and players to know how the system works. But he looked like someone that, when Milwaukee got him from waivers, this is the guy that they're hoping to get. And I think that's going to be a big wrinkle. And as Ersan looks a little bit slower and maybe Ersan needs more of a breather and takes time to get, back up to speed, Marvin slotting in perfectly was a good thing as well. And the rotation-wise, Dante DiVincenzo getting the start in the first half for Eric Bledsoe, and then George Hill got the start in the second half. So George Hill was the first sub for Milwaukee in the first half, and then Dante was the first sub in the second half. So I don't know how long it's going to take before Eric Bledsoe is 100% back and even starting, but it's good to know that at least Dante or George Hill will still be taking his spot, and they're not going to try and go bigger and still having one of those guards come off the bench.
Yeah, a lot of really, really great points there. The Marvin one is really fascinating. I was looking at his numbers before we got started, and his usage rate was incredibly low. I mean, below Tony Snell levels of usage rate. So we're talking.
How is that even possible? That
I know.
Usage rate. That's what that means.
So I mean, see, you make a great point that hopefully this time off maybe helped him get a little more acclimated to his teammates. And I think what made me most excited about it was, he's brought in to be a guy who's going to hit threes at a decent clip. I think he was third on the team in terms of his 3-point attempt rate. So most of his shots are 3-pointers. A higher percentage of his shots were 3-pointers than ever in his career. But we got to see, I thought, a lot more diversity from him offensively. He was working as a high post. He got the ball in the high post and worked a little weird 2-man game with Ersan Ilyasova in the Kings game, which Lord knows if we're going to that in the playoffs, then we're beyond hope. But seeing him run a little pick and roll with Chris and get the ball and work his way down into the lane, I thought that was promising, just finding new ways to get him involved. That's not just sit out on the corner and space the floor. I think that'll hopefully work wonders going forward for trying to make sure that he's as involved and it feels like as part of the team as possible. The other interesting thing, you talked about the absence of Eric Bledsoe. I think it ties back to your point, Riley. Seeing Chris run that pick and roll was really great to see. Obviously, he's partially doing it because Eric Bledsoe is out, so you need someone who could run the pick and roll. But I did think, I thought Dante DiVincenzo and George Hill did well, but I did feel like you do see a little bit of the absence of Eric Bledsoe when you have Dante DiVincenzo trying to drive into the lane, and he just doesn't quite have the burst or ability to get there in the same way, Riley, that I think Eric Bledsoe does.
I would agree, and I think I'm not sure. There's not really much of a contingent for the Dante at point guard, the heir apparent. So, and I think these minutes are probably driving it home where it's this weird trade-off, right? Where he's okay handling the ball, but it's not as compact of his dribbling isn't as compact. He's not nearly, his physicality isn't as compact. So that's a positive on offense when he's the shooting guard or playing the 2, because then he's able to utilize the fact that everybody else is paying attention to Chris or Giannis or Eric, whoever it is, and then he can kind of poach off ball. And then on defense, I think it's interesting in that you've talked a lot about Dante being able to get around picks, and he's a little bit different from Eric in that he gets around picks not by blowing it up, but kind of being fluid. And then what's interesting is because he has the length and the height advantage over Eric, usually you'd have Eric pressuring whoever the ball handler is off the pick and roll, right behind he beat. It make it uncomfortable. But the thing about Dante is there's so many times where he blocks the ball where whoever the guy is runs into Brook, and instead of trying to kind of jump off balance to get space to get the shot off, then Dante, because of his length, is able to get there and kind of swat it away, obviously. So I thought that was an interesting difference to look at defensively, but I agree that it's just tough to envision Dante getting a lot of point guard minutes just because he's not the same kind of facilitator and he doesn't have the same exact play style, which is fine. And he's really good at his play style, but that doesn't necessarily fit with what you normally expect from your point guard, for example. And maybe there's even a plus to not having Eric out there because, for example, Brian during his last What's the segment called on Mondays now? You would know off the top of your head. Adam.
Bucks Film Room Live.
Yes,
8,
Bucks
8
Film Room
p.m.
Live.
Central, 8 p.m. Central, Brew Hoop. If you want to check it out there, or his YouTube, go check it out.
So plug there. But I thought last week he talked about Eric Bledsoe and dealing with the fact that defenders are off of him. And I think Eric's numbers from 3 were a little bit better, like by a hair, than Dante. But part of not having Eric out there, and if you have like George Hill, Wes, and Brooke, for example, those are 3 pretty no doubt 3-point shooters, whereas Eric might not have nearly the same reputation. And so you're missing Eric in that he's not able to play as the point of attack on offense, but you kind of gain in some ways in the fact that now the opponent has 3 shooters that have a reputation and have executed throughout the season, like George Hill at a really high level, Wes and Brooke at pretty decent levels as well. And so it's a weird balance. I would rather have Eric back just because I think the pros are greater than the cons of having him back. But it's been interesting watching Dante at point guard, watching lineups where Hill is at point guard, but you have 2 other shooters out there, and then letting Chris and Giannis, I should say, kind of work off of that. So there's a lot of different folds. I'm not saying that it's necessarily all positive that Eric is in there, but if it gets people more comfortable where if Eric is struggling in the future and you have to pull him in lieu of like George Hill, hopefully this will be experience that people can go off of and say, we can still do this, no problem, even if we don't have the guy who's normally our number 1 point guard. So a lot of Eric Bledsoe thoughts. I don't know. It's kind of mixed. I'm interested to see what he looks like coming back to, because maybe he'll play so well that it won't even matter. Be like, well, this is why he's back this is why you want him out there because of what he does.
Yeah, I was going to say, Kyle, that's really like the different looks we've been getting is mainly the absence of Eric Bledsoe. Everyone who goes in for Pat Connaughton is like, like either you or Riley said, they're replaceable. But really, we're getting different looks because of the absence of Eric Bledsoe right now.
Yeah, with Eric Bledsoe, just how he plays, other than Giannis, he's the only guy that can capably take the ball from the top of the key, get straight to the hoop, and finish, whether it's contact or no contact. And I think Giannis is right now in the roster the only one that can consistently do it well. When Brogdon was on the Bucks, he was another guy that could do it. But and also just Bledsoe's physicality and how he plays, it relies a lot on athleticism. It's a different type of athleticism than Dante. While Dante, it's kind of more that like agility and being able to kind of make a fast reaction, can use his arms. It's kind of get a deflection and go from there. Bledsoe, it's kind of more that I'm stronger than you. I'm going to be able to absorb the contact. I'm going to be able to be a little bit more physical in that regard. So how that changes is interesting. And like Riley said, while you lose that kind of point of attack, you do gain the shooter. But at the same time, I think that's what makes Bledsoe a little bit dangerous is if he gets going, he can shoot the ball pretty well. He can go, 3 to 6, 4 or 5, something like that. It's just we don't really see him take those shots unless he absolutely has to. And, the lanes are a little bit clogged up. So I think with Bledsoe, it's going to be interesting in terms offensively. I think once he gets back, he'll still be relatively okay, still attacking the hoop. It's just defensively, especially with his strategy on James Harden, if he plays for that game or not, then I wonder what Milwaukee's going to do as the alternative. I know they had Wesley Matthews on James Harden the last time they played each other, so maybe they go back to that route. But I think it's going to be on the defensive end that I'm a little bit more curious on whether going from Bledsoe and his more physical style of play and his ability to take more contact compared to Dante or George Hill, who rely more on using their arm length and deflecting, getting in passing lanes and not necessarily fighting through screens and just more going around it. That I'm wondering how that's going to affect Milwaukee for the next, probably 1 or 2 weeks that Bledsoe's still getting back into shape.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up defensively. You talked about it earlier with the Spurs game. That game was interesting. Obviously stifled them to 92 points. Also, that first game was weirdly 10-minute quarters, and then no other games are going to be 10-minute quarters, which is fine.
I was confused by that as well. I like turned on the Kings game. I'm like, what is happening? Like, are we not being consistent across games, or that is strange?
Well, that makes the 80 points a little less shocking. It's still shocking that they got 80 at half, but I was like, wow, they really got 80 points in 20 minutes of gameplay. Mm-hmm. That is impressive. But okay, I guess not.
Yeah, I don't know. Great wrinkle by the NBA to make sure they can get up to speed. Anyway, in that Spurs game though, it was interesting because the Bucks, who aren't a team that really creates that many turnovers, but obviously in that game took the Spurs to lead the league in terms of fewest turnovers per game. I think they have like 12.3. Game against the Bucks, they have 22. I'd chalk a lot of that up to just sloppiness on their end and missing some of their better players. But I think you were right, Kyle, in that it does still show that the Bucks offense is still clicking on a lot of cylinders and shows especially the symbiotic relationship between all the defenders on the floor when they're out there. They are able to. They know where each other are going to be. They know when to push the envelope in terms of passing lanes and jumping balls and getting steals and that kind of stuff. You saw that with Dante DiVincenzo, of course. But I think I'm very fascinated to see and make sure that the Bucks defense is still at the historic, if it can still perform at the historic level it was doing before the break. I mean, I think that's something that we take for granted a little bit, but with a 4-month layoff, we can't really know. I think the offense seems like that's it. That's something that I don't really know how it wouldn't be up to speed, but the defense was so historically great. I mean, up there with like some of the best defenses of the last couple decades. So many better points, net rating points per better than just the Raptors, who are in second place. So I'm very curious, Riley, to see if there's any drop off in that, because that really was the thing that was consistently great for them all of last year in the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I'm not as worried about it just because even when the team was sort of sputtering relative to their rest of the regular season at the end, right before the season got put on hold, the issue at that point still wasn't necessarily the defense. Like that, the principles are a lot more secure, I would say. And like I said, throughout all of the playoffs last year, that kind of maintained. It was more so the offensive sputtering. And so we saw at the end of this regular season, sort of a similar thing happened where the defense continued to be consistently great, but then the net rating was dropping because the offensive rating was dropping. And I think we ended the season like 5th overall in offensive rating, I'm pretty sure. And so, yes, it's heartening. And I think we can give a lot of credit to that, to the fact that Brook Lopez seems to be on both ends of the floor. We can talk about him too, because he had 2 really good scrimmage games, but he's such a good anchor inside, and it makes it so much easier between Giannis poaching off ball or weak side or wherever he happens to be, and Brook inside. Like it's such a simplistic system, but it works so well that there's a reason why other teams haven't figured it out over 2 seasons now. And so going into this, I'm not really worried about the defense at all. And so the other concern would be the offense. And given the fact that guys had time to rest up, Giannis isn't going to be laboring nearly as much after 82 whole games, plus going into the playoffs and things like that. So I think from these first 2 games, really encouraging. The Kings scored a lot, but that's because we had 20 minutes of DJ Wilson in the second half. So what are you going to do about that? But when the main guys are out there, it looks to be functioning as well as you could. And again, there's a reason why nobody's figured it out. Like it's worked as well for 2 seasons in a row. This isn't a Jason Kidd situation where it was like first year, everybody's like, whoa, what are they doing here? And then the second year is like, okay, well, we're just going to punish them every single game, and they're not going to do anything different about it. It's worked so well. Stick to it. There's not much to change there, and I think that's encouraging for us through the first 2 games at least.
Yeah, Kyle, let's talk a little about Brook Lopez, who so far 6 for 9 from three-point land through these 2 games, which is promising to see. He had 5 blocks against the Kings. I mean, you can't take anything really away from the scrimmage, but I do think, if there's anyone who we think offensively certainly had room to grow from the layoff till now, I think Brook Lopez is probably the prime candidate.
It was one of those things where with his shooting, every time he shot the ball, it was good looks. It's not, him forcing bad threes or him forcing up shots. It was they were open and it just didn't fall. And hopefully we didn't think he would be this 30% and below shooter that he was showing all of this season. And maybe it wasn't going to be this 40-plus 3-point shooter that we saw last year. So maybe now that like 35% range is just what I think that's kind of the mean of the average that we should expect out of him moving forward. But no, he's looked really good. I don't know if it's the power of Disney that's the reason, or maybe he just had a chance to kind of do over and just go back in with a fresh mindset. But his shots are now falling. It's a good thing to see. And I wonder how much of that is just more of a just keep shooting and things will level itself out. So I think offensively that's going to be big for Milwaukee because, in that Raptor series last year in the Eastern Conference Finals, other than the first game, it was really tough for him to get going. And you could tell that when his shots were falling, then it was kind of less of the offense sputtered more because you didn't have to worry about him as a threat, and you can go and double Giannis and Chris and force, and just kind of clogged up everything else. While now, if Brook can, like I said, shoot that 35 to 40% range, I think it reopens the offense a little bit more. And defensively, he's still got it. I think he should be on an all-defense team, and hell, I've even thought at times that he should be Defensive Player of the Year ahead of Giannis if you had to pick a Milwaukee player, just because it's not just the blocks that he's getting, it's just the general presence that he has. He's altering shots, he's forcing guys to just stop trying to go for layups and passing it out. So I think his impact defensively has been the best that I've ever seen out of him, and I think that's the reason why Milwaukee's defense has been so good. Is because Brook Lopez's defense, it was good last year, now it's great this year. So it's good to see him playing well, and this is why he's probably the third most important Buck. If he doesn't play well, that team's going to suffer, and I think that's a good thing that right now the shots are falling and defensively hasn't missed a beat.
Do you think, Adam, that as a way, sort of like getting in the right mindset, Brook hired some guy to do the Mickey Mouse voice and read your article about his post-game offense to kind of get him in the right headset or like mindset? What do you think about that? Because there were times, it's not nearly probably like to the rate as he was back in the day with the Nets, but there have been times where it seems like Bud, or I don't know if it's kind of on the fly, Brook seems more engaged or more like willing to go inside, or even if it's just like he'll do this all the time where he'll be on the perimeter and like he'll just take his man on and dribble to the hoop for whatever reason. But I thought there were some times where he worked in the post and is like that he's a ginormous human being. And this was especially against the Kings where they were undersized because of the guys that they're missing, but it was just automatic for him at the rim when he got into the paint. And I'm not sure if maybe you credited to what you said or what you wrote and he read that. I don't know.
Good Lord, I hope not, because hearing Mickey Mouse in your head saying, like, you shot 43% on turnaround to 3 feet. I would not wish that on anyone. That was also one of the worst Mickey Mouse impressions I haven't seen.
Yeah, we'll do that post edit. We're going to definitely put a little filter over that for sure.
I mean, it's a great point. I mean, when I looked at the numbers, he was shooting he had about at least one more full post up per game than last year, which 1 to 2, when you're having 2 post ups a game, doesn't seem like much. But when it comes to the Bucks offense, I mean, like it means quite a bit when so many of the possessions are going to both Giannis and Chris. And so that, Brook Lopez doesn't have as many chances. So when you're trying to optimize him and throw in a little more diversity, I think that's a really good wrinkle for him to follow. Also has been sneaky, one of the more efficient drivers on the team the last 2 seasons, which is really, really odd. Rarely does it, but when he gets sort of that lumbering body going, finds a way to make it to the hoop. I think that maybe that part of his game, feeling more well-rounded out, when he's able to get those shots to go, I'm sure that helps him a little bit from the outside too, where he feels like, okay, well, at least I'm able to contribute this way, even if I'm not, my shot's not falling on the other end. So, hopefully that he's able to feel like he can continue to work down low and Bud continues to work that into the offense. I know he ran a really, really nice pick and roll with Chris in one of the games. It's escaping me which one, but that was really, really nice to see. There's also a weird, it won't matter, I think, without fans there, but there's like a weird energy to some of Brook Lopez's threes. Like the trailing 3 that's so super deep feels like a cheat code, and that feels like a more exciting 3 to me than, I don't know, even just like a regular pull-up 3, and his are always from so deep. They seem to they carry like more energy for me than a typical 3, which is a dumb thing. That really means nothing, but there's something about that I kind of the Brook Lopez.
Which shot carries more energy for you? Either the Brook Lopez 45-footer or the Kyle Korver, like he's literally perpendicular to the floor and taking the shot. Like that's his only go-to shot, Kyle Korver, and I appreciate his consistency with that shot type.
Man, I don't know. I think the Brook one is as good as Kyle Korver is.
I think the Brook one as well, just because it's just more the absurdity of how far back he is, and he still decides to shoot it no matter what.
Yeah, I would agree.
It's crazy.
I feel like Kyle Korver's that's just his form, and that's just what that's what he's been doing for the last 50 years. So
yeah, let's speak very briefly. Speaking of Kyle Korver, about this Kings game. It was the second scrimmage. The starters really only played one half. Brook Lopez, wrecked the Kings in the third quarter. But Bucks win 131-123. Giannis 15 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists, 11 of 13 from the free throw line. That was promising. He had mentioned how the silence at the free throw line was weird, so that was good to see. Brook Lopez ends with 21 points, 4 of 6 from deep. Like I said, did a lot of damage in the third quarter. Kyle Korver leads the team with 22 points. 8 of 14 from the field. Not a whole lot for me to take away from this one. Giannis wrecked him inside. The Kings don't really have any sort of body that can match up with him. Godspeed to Harry Giles and how his body probably felt the next day. We saw some of the pick and rolls that I thought were, promising that you were mentioning earlier, Riley. The Chris Giannis pick and roll continued to look really good between them. This one felt more than any other, certainly more than the first game, like a summer league game or like definitely a preseason game where you get, primary ball handler Sterling barreling into the rim and then not even really getting a shot off as he's pushed to the ground, which is fine. But like when your second half offense devolves into run Kyle Korver around a screen, pass him the ball and have him shoot, there's just not going to be a whole lot to take away from that. But first half, was there anything that stood out to you, Riley, from the Kings game?
The big thing, and this is so tough to tell with Giannis because he can be really on one game and then really off the next, but there were multiple possessions where he did his usual, like, I'm going to start at the half court line, just start sprinting at whoever, and then after having defenders commit to him, then he passes out to whoever the three-point shooter is. And sometimes it works really, really well, and sometimes he kind of like, it's weird because he'll wait until he comes to a complete stop and then pivot on his foot and then like whip it out to off balance to whoever. But in the Kings game, in the first half especially, there were a lot of possessions where in the flow of moving, instead of waiting, having 3 defenders on him, pivoting and then finding whoever it is, he seemed to almost have it locked into his mind. And this can be a pro or a con, depending on how it works. But he's like, okay, I know that Wes is going to be like directly behind me. His defender's already committing to me because, like you said, the Kings didn't have enough size inside to even like try to stop Giannis. So it was like, let's just swarm him instead. And he consistently executed on that, found 3-point shooters, whether it be Wes, whether it be Marvin, whether it be even Ron Lopez in the corner, for example. And so, yes, it was a romp. There wasn't a lot that the Kings could do defensively, but given that, since they chose to swarm instead, and we've seen other teams, namely the Raptors last year, who really did that well, and Giannis kind of struggled to figure out how to get outside of that or to find other guys, other teammates, to see him consistently through that first half do it so well, that was heartening to me. Now, the question is that going to be consistent throughout the playoffs against teams with better defensive personnel who have a better idea how to stop him? We'll see. But anytime that you see Giannis be able to find a guy and get the assist that way, I think that's just, it makes life easier for him and it opens up the offense, and that's when it functions at its best. So that was what I saw was the big thing to me.
Yeah, it's a good point. The blue squares really helped out in that respect. You can really see those players plant at those spots, and Giannis really expect to know where they are. I think he had a behind the head pass to, I think it was Robin Lopez in that first game against the Spurs. So really nice to see from Giannis. Nice win against the Kings. I think the really not a whole lot else to take away from that game. So let's move on. There's 2 things we want to talk about before the break. First one is the full schedule, which we haven't talked about since it came out. So the full schedule of who the Bucks are going to be facing once the seeding games actually start. They have one last scrimmage left. And so the full schedule is going to be Boston, Houston, Brooklyn, Miami, Dallas, Toronto, Washington, and Memphis. So, Kyle, is there one game out of that group that you're more intrigued to see than any other?
I would go Miami just because that is the one team the Bucks haven't been able to beat this season. They've lost them twice. First time they had the large lead going into the second half, and that kind of fell by the wayside. And the second time, I think it was either right on the back-to-back or they were still on a long road trip, and they just looked sluggish and could not match Miami's physicality. So that's going to be the one that I'm interested in, mainly because I want to see how Giannis adjusts to it now that he is fully rested, now that he has had a chance to. I just want to see how he does, because that might be a team that Milwaukee's going to have to face in the second round if Miami keeps the 4th or 5th seed and wins their first round. So that's going to be, I think that's going to be the game that I'm interested in the most, just because it's not like Miami has, shooters other than Tyler Herro and Duncan Robinson. Jimmy Butler is kind of that guy where he's going to take a bunch of shots, but he can make them. And it seems like he's going to be more the guy that everyone compares Chris to. Bam Adebayo, how he is played, and if he guards Giannis, or if we use Brook to go at him. I think it's going to be Miami the most, just because that is more of a potential second round opponent that Milwaukee hasn't beaten. And the last 2 times has been Milwaukee unable to string together enough offensive possession against Miami's defense. And if they can at least show some signs of competent offense against Miami, then I like their chances in a 7-game series. I already like their chances, but instead of it going 6 or 7 where the Bucks win, maybe it can only be 4 or 5.
What about you, Riley? Any game that you're more excited to see than others?
I would say, it's tough because of the way, again, the Bucks have such a lead, but I'm looking forward to the Toronto game. At that point, I'm assuming that the seeding for the Bucks is going to be locked up. It would be, unless, they lose like every single game up until that point, which I don't see happening. But I think that'll be interesting just because there might still be, based on how the seeding goes, there might still be something at stake for Toronto. They're kind of not necessarily the boogeymen because Kawhi isn't there anymore, but I think there's still a little bit of a rivalry wrapped up in that. And the Celtics are early on enough. They're the first game in the seeding games where that might not have nearly as much of like in the way of stakes, whereas the Toronto game might theoretically. So that's the one I'm kind of interested in, just because maybe seeding implications. They're an interesting team to try and match up against, just the way that they're coached and their personnel, and because of the history from last year. So that would be the one. But any of the games, it's going to be mostly a wash, I think, for Milwaukee, because again, after like 2 or 3 games, they might have it locked up and it won't even matter at that point. So we'll see.
Yeah, for me, I think I would agree with you too. If there was another one I'd be interested in, I'd be interested in the Mavericks. I feel like they're getting a little bit of buzz here as we start to get closer to the bubble. You got Porzingis, they got Luka Doncic. They have that sort of deadly combination. They of course ended the Bucks' long winning streak earlier in the season, so there's maybe a little bit of a revenge factor there. But I think I'd be interested in that because I'm not super. I kind of know what like a Houston matchup looks like between the Bucks. It's really all focused on that Eric Bledsoe potentially guarding James Harden matchup, but I think the Dallas matchup is interesting, just given Luka Doncic's size, how the Bucks might decide to attack him, and then Kristaps Porzingis inside as well. Him versus Giannis before the injury, that was slowly becoming one of the more exciting matchups between 2 players in the league. So it'd be pretty cool if Porzingis was able to get back to health. So I guess I'll look forward to that one. That one's pretty exciting. Anything else on the schedule that you guys wanted to comment on? It's hard, Kyle, because the Bucks have such a huge lead. It really won't matter too much.
Yeah, and I feel like for the contenders, I would say the Bucks, Raptors, Lakers, Clippers, and I think that's going to be the only teams I consider. They already have their places more or less sealed up, so now it's just more, what does Philly with a healthier Ben Simmons? Do they, possibly get all the way up to 3rd, or do they sit at 6? If, the Pacers and Heat, how they adjust, especially with the Pacers losing Sabonis, but they might get Oladipo back. It's more a lot of the seeding stuff, both on like the 3 through 6 range, along with it in the Western Conference. So I think for them, it's going to matter more. While for Milwaukee and Toronto, let's just get through this healthy. Let's just get as much of our guys back in shape as possible. Because once those games start, and I feel like it's going to be very fast, and it's going to be a sprint to the end of the season. And thankfully, it looks like Milwaukee's probably going to get Orlando in the first round and not I think it's Washington that's sitting in 9th, but I don't think they don't have Bertans, who decided not to risk it. They don't have Bradley Beal. So it's going to be, let's just get healthy, face Orlando, win that series, move on to the next one. That's when it's going to start getting intense and serious.
Agreed. All right, guys, let's take a quick break, and then on the other side, we'll move on to some of our old standbys for the miscellaneous category. So stay tuned. All right, we are back. Fellas, it's time. There's still not that much basketball to talk about, so we are going to keep doing our potpourri stuff. We're gonna kick it off with our rapid fire questions section. I wrote these right before we recorded, so you know they're good. Okay. First one. What do you keep your house temperature set at? Let's say it's like a hot day and you want the AC on.
Well, ours is currently at 66. I would rather have it up to like 67 or 68, because especially when I'm in my basement, it is an ice box down here.
I live in an apartment where we have just some things shoved in the wall to make things cold. So I prefer setting number 5 on my AC unit. I have no idea what that temperature is. So fans, windows open, and if it's really hot, then setting number 5 on the AC unit, whatever that is in Fahrenheit.
Okay, perfect. Oh, I'm sorry, right?
That's all right. I'm not too offended. It's whatever.
I'm like 2 years removed from that life, and I've already forgotten it. I've clearly moved on. I feel terrible.
Yeah, I understand. No problem.
All right, next one. This is big. Boneless or bone-in wings?
I used to be a strong adherent to the bone-in. However, when places like Buffalo Wild Wings, I mean, we don't have to get into this too much, but I think the quality has, I mean, it's awful now. Let's just be honest about it, right? Beat-ups is awful. We don't have to get into it too much, but I was bone-in for a long time, and then I transitioned slowly but surely to boneless. I think I'm still team boneless at this point, though I do not mind a good drummy or a good... I call them wings. I don't know if people call them flats or what, but I am team boneless generally.
I'm team bone-in just because I feel like, other than B-dubs, if you go to a wing place and get wings, they're always bone-in. So I just got used to it. And yeah, I don't mind bones. It's just one more thing I just have to like watch out. And if I chew on a bone, I could take and spit it out. So it's not a big deal.
Fair enough. Quality debate between you two. We could go further with that one, but we'll leave it at that. All right. Maybe we've done this before. Do you have a tattoo?
I do not. I was thinking, so right before COVID hit, and when it was like, well, the hospitals might actually just not exist anymore. I was contemplating getting, because I ran a marathon 2 years ago, and I was contemplating getting the finishing time on like my rib cage or whatever. So I still haven't gotten that, but that whenever I probably will get it sooner rather than later now that things are a little bit more calm. But do not have one now, but plan on getting one in the near future.
I don't have one. I've kind of gone back and forth on if I want to get one. I thought of getting one to like commemorate Sterling, more or less, but then I just got a necklace, which saves myself the time, energy, and pain. So I go back and forth. Sometimes I think, yeah, it'd be cool to get one, but I can never think of one that would be worth keeping on my body forever.
I kind of think it'd be cool if we got like Brew podcast tattoos, right? Like dead silence from the other hosts, so I'm gonna guess that's a no.
Only if it's the Photoshop you sent yesterday.
Yeah, that'll look really good. I'm sure we'll find really good artists who will be able to transition that to our skin, no problem.
I can't have a picture. That would be cool if we had pictures of our own faces on our body. That would be fun. Okay. Last one. Is cilantro to you taste like soap, or is it delicious?
Delicious. I used to be team soap. Now I'm team delicious.
I feel like I don't notice it enough, so I guess it's delicious. I hate cilantro. I don't mind it. I just don't notice it enough, and maybe it's because of like the cilantro I'm putting on or whatever. But it's fine. I wouldn't. If there's an in between team whatever, that's me.
Okay.
Team whatever. Yeah.
Okay, hold on though. I need to revisit the used to be Team Soap. I thought it was like genetically there's like a chemical issue with people who have it taste like soap. Like it's something wrong. Did you evolve, Riley? Like your own body evolved?
It's a really good question. I like to chalk it up to my maturing into, the adult male that I am now. I used to be so mature and I had the immature palate of a 12-year-old, even when I was like 20 or whatever. So I think this is a testament to personal growth, but it wasn't so much that I thought it tasted like soap. I just wasn't a huge fan of the taste. And if you have it for a lot of dishes, it's so not overpowering, but you could tell when it's in there for the most part, unless you're Kyle, in which case it's like team middling. But in my experience, I was like, it's really over the top. I'm not used to it, or I'm not a huge fan of it. And so I didn't think it was soap necessarily, but I wasn't just like, wow, I love this. Whereas nowadays, I really appreciate the kind of different flavor that it tosses in. And every week we get cilantro and toss it in whatever we're making. So it wasn't so much that my chemical makeup changed necessarily in that way. It's just I became more appreciative of it as I aged. So
thank you both for bringing a little complexity and nuance to my binary. So,
our pleasure. Yeah.
All right. That's all I got. So let's move on. Kyle's film review.
All right. So I really struggled trying to think of a movie that I watched, but I realized that Hamilton counts as a movie, as it is now released on Disney Plus. So I've seen Hamilton as a show in Chicago. So it was interesting watching it, and that was 2 years ago to now, where on Disney Plus they have a Broadway version of it, and you can just tell the differences between the sets and the characters and the facial expressions between the two. So I thought that was really interesting. But in terms of the, I guess, quote unquote movie overall, aka the Broadway show, it's really, there are things that you kind of notice and that you can enjoy in terms of how the cast express themselves, in terms of how the songs are and how it flows and how it ties into everything. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a great idea for Disney Plus to put it on there. So because it's so expensive to try and get tickets to any Hamilton show, no matter what city it's in. So I thought that was a cool thing to do. Music is pretty good. The first half it's interesting because like the first half is very much go, go, go. And then there's like a slow part and it's like go, go, go. And then it's a slow part. And then like the second part is kind of just like a whole lot of sad. The second part is just very, very, there's always some sad story that associates with it. So I think that's kind of interesting as well. But I enjoyed it. I give it a 9 out of 10. I really love Hamilton. I love the music. The cast crushed it out of the park. Oddly enough, I still don't think it's Lin-Manuel Miranda's best musical, though. So take that for what you will.
My one question follow-up, are you predisposed to like musicals, Kyle? Or are you, do you in general like musicals?
Yeah, it was one of those, because Hamilton, no, it wasn't. The first one I saw was Phantom of the Opera in Milwaukee, and that was like 10 years ago. But I am predisposed to like it just because I think as long as the music is entertaining enough, any musical can be good. And that's why I think with Hamilton it's so effective, because the music is really entertaining. You don't have to watch the musical to enjoy the music. So with that, with Wicked, trying to think of some other like big Broadway ones, Sweeney Todd, you really don't need to watch it to understand and like enjoy the music, which is kind of good. Unlike something like Cats, where it's just a cluster and you don't know what's going on. And that was even before the new movie came out. So I've always been a big musical person. If I have a chance to go to a community theater show, I would go. And Emma's really into theater as well. So I kind of just got more ingrained into it. And Sound of Music is also another one that you can listen to the music, and that's fine as well. You don't have to watch it, but it's enjoy. You can enjoy both at the same time.
Yeah, I ask simply because I'm not predisposed to like it. And it's cool that people like musicals, but one of my opinions is if you listen to music like album, or like you're just hanging out and you're just like, oh, let's put on like the Hamilton soundtrack, I automatically think you might be a psycho. So that's just my feeling on most musicals. It's just not for me, but I'm glad that you're out here advocating for it, and shout out to everybody who likes musicals.
I will say, if you have to watch a good musical if you ever watch it if you see a musical for the first time. It has to be a good one, because the bad one can definitely sour your opinions on it for a long time.
Well, middle school Adam loved listening to the Wicked soundtrack on CD, so I guess
middle school Adam was a psycho, apparently. No offense to old Adam, but
probably not far off. Yeah. Anyway, moving on, we've got two segments straight from the head of Riley to send us out before we make our predictions. So let's move on to Vulture Talk.
Yeah, and I suppose it's pretty hypocritical of me to call other people psychos when I spend so much of my free time trolling the internet for random rumors of other psychos talking about Giannis and or talking about fountain pens. But this week, the only thing that I was able to find was I don't know what Sports Illustrated is anymore, because it essentially died, but I think it has now weird sub pages for outside of fan sided. It's weird sub pages, blogs for the teams themselves. And there was some article on the Mavs blog about bubble donuts and how it was a 12-point program on why Giannis would go to the Mavericks. And the argument boiled down to essentially that Milwaukee has never proven to be a place where you can get big name free agents to sign. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that for all of Dallas's existence, that was actually also the case for them. So whatever, it's kind of cognitive dissonance there. But then I think they're
Greg Monroe like that. I cannot believe that.
How dare they? Or I think their excuse was the fact that Porzingis signed with them, but they traded for Porzingis. So it's not like they got him as a straight up unrestricted free agent. And also they had to give him all of the freaking money to come there. So whatever to the side, it was essentially the case of again, Giannis loves European people more than he loves Americans. Why wouldn't he want to join a team full of European superstars and rule the cosmos or something? Again, I think it's insane. The rambling is of mostly insane person. I'm going to put it on the Monday Morning Media Roundup because I need the content. But shout out to the Mavs who, for whatever reason, I can understand why Miami would think they have a chance. I can understand why Toronto thinks they have a chance. I can understand the Lakers, I guess, or the Warriors, besides the fact that they don't have enough money to pay for Giannis. But I can kind of get where they're coming from if I squint my eyes so much that my eyes are actually shut. But with Dallas, I can't even do that, And so that's why articles from teams like that are so ridiculous, in my opinion.
Kudos to the Mavs fans. The European thing just makes no sense to me. It's is there no? You're saying there's no cultural difference between Kristaps Porzingis and Giannis Antetokounmpo? It's significantly greater than anyone than state to state. Do they know that it's a little different over there? The countries are states.
People don't realize that Lithuania is actually just like northern Greece when you think about it, if you look at a map. So it's very similar backgrounds. Athens is a lot like Vilnius. The cities are much like one another. So I get where that mistake would happen.
Plus, I'm pretty sure most other European countries hate each other at this point. So
yeah, there's a lot of beef over there that you don't necessarily have. This is totally unrelated, but wasn't there a rumor that Vlade Divac didn't want to get Luka Doncic because of old country beef, old Yugoslav beef or whatever?
Oh yeah, that is real beef. That is that whole Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia. Yeah, they don't mess around with it.
We don't have to get into the politics of post-Cold War Europe, but I think it's definitely a little reductive if you're oh yeah, they're all Europeans, so they're gonna love playing with each other. So shout out to Mavs fans and your crazy ideas. It's not gonna happen, dude. Sorry.
I'd like to see you. I feel like you are actually qualified enough to write that piece, Riley, about how post-Cold War Europe, those decisions led to the Kings not picking Doncic. Yeah. I would read that.
I'm not sure if it would be appropriate to put on Brew Hoop, but I'll definitely put it on my own personal site because that feels like that's like red meat. That's asking for people from across the internet to flood the comment section with just horrific stuff. So we'll avoid it.
Maybe we can pitch it to Sacktown Royalty. Yes. Kings fans are strong about that stuff. So
yeah.
All right. Anyway, it's time for the return of Riley's fountain pen review.
Yeah, and this week it's interesting because I forgot my other two fountain pens that I haven't reviewed at work. So this week we're going to be doing our first ink review. So this brand, let's see if you can see it. It's called Iroshizuku by Pilot. So Pilot's one of the Japanese brands. They're like one of the giants. I have a couple of their pens. This is like their specialty brand that they ended up doing a couple of years ago. And I think there's like 20 different colors that they have. And this is the Takasumi. And as you can see from the really cool fancy bottle, it's really over the top. I believe it's 50 milliliters. And the thing about this is as dark of a black as you can get for most fountain pen inks. The Iroshizuku line is already like the higher tier of fountain pen inks, and this is it's tough to get something that's like almost getting ink that you would get on a page for like a printer or something along those lines. But this is the equivalent where I believe it's waterproof, where a lot of fountain pen inks aren't. It's so buttery smooth, especially if you're using it in a bigger nib that allows the ink to come out a lot quicker. So in medium-sized nibs, italic nibs, stub nibs, whatever it happens to be, it looks excellent. If you're looking for a base black, I know there's others like Noodlers. I'm sure there's like Monteverde, a lot of them. But if you're looking for best quality, best value for the money, I got to say that the Takasumi from Iroshizuku would be the one that I would suggest. So nothing too crazy. I don't really have a sample. I think if you looked at previous videos, I've shown samples of text with it. It just looks really, really nice. So highly suggested if you're looking for a black to start your collection.
I do have one quick question. So with how dark the ink was, do you think that makes a difference in terms of like what you can and can't write on? Or like,
yes,
like
absolutely.
That's like what I'm trying to wonder.
Absolutely. So there's this whole thing where if I tried to use like your base office paper, it's just the way that it's the acidity on it, the way that they treat the paper, it does not lend itself well to something like this. Or you could even go like for your just basic fountain pen ink. It's called bleeding, where like the ink just kind of like splays out from wherever you were writing and it kind of just gets splotchy. So there are special papers out there that are built for fountain pens. And so usually they're either untreated or there's like a higher cotton percentage, which is able to absorb the ink and prevent it from essentially bleeding. And so you'll have seen, I think a couple months ago when the season was still happening, I have a Midori MD, which is a Japanese brand, paper brand. They're made out of cotton, or they have a pretty high cotton percentage. And this ink in particular, because it runs a little bit thicker with a bigger nib, I should say, you can really tell the difference in that it looks sharp. It allows you to kind of get a little more calligraphy. Like when you see calligraphy, they're not using your basic paper you would get in like a basic notebook or like printer paper. That's specialty paper they're using to get that kind of result. So you will have to adjust what kind of paper if you care about, bleeding or anything along those lines. So that's my paper review. Eventually we'll go through all my inks and then we'll go through my papers, and at that point I'll be tapped out, and then we'll have to find a new test. But we still have quite a few weeks if we're going to be going each week a new ink and stuff like that. So looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Stay tuned. All right, fellas, let's make predictions. It's been a long time since we could do this, and I didn't have to run a fake simulation. So we are going to get it started. Oh, never. Okay, sorry. Anyways, we're going to get started with first we have the Monday scrimmage against the Pelicans. Friday, seeding game opener against the Boston Celtics. And then next Sunday, a matchup against the Houston Rockets. Kyle Carr, what say you? How will the Bucks do?
They will go 2-1. They will win the scrimmage. They will beat the Celtics and lose to the Rockets. And the only reason why I think they'll lose to the Rockets is because I feel like James Harden is going to want to try his hardest. And he will take every three, and he will score 50-something points. And he will get to the line 50-something times. He is not giving the ball to anyone else. So I'm going to say 2-1 because Giannis and Chris will both, and Eric Bledsoe, and everyone will have fouled out by the time the Rockets game ends.
And the beauty of that Rockets game when it goes that way is then people will be like, see, LeBron wouldn't let that happen. That's why he's the MVP, because he wouldn't let James Harden score 50. I'm going to go slightly. I'm going to take Kyle's role of the optimist. I'm going to go 3-0. I thought these scrimmages were going to be like 40 minutes of DJ Wilson, since they're not, and they're actually like somewhat sort of trying, and just by somewhat sort of trying, they blow teams out. Agreed that they'll beat the Pelicans. I don't even know if Zion's back from his family emergency, so he might not even be available. But the Celtics and the Rockets figure like it's going to be proving time. There'll still be something to play for Milwaukee before they secure the top seed. The rivals with both those teams. The only downside would be maybe if Eric Bledsoe comes back and he's still kind of getting up to speed against the Rockets, where Kyle's situation comes through and James Harden has a really big game. But I think overall the team will do well enough to do 3-0 this week.
I'm going to agree. I'm going to go 3-0, and they're going to lock up that 1 seed. I think they only need 2 wins, and then they have it. So I think they're going to lock up the 1 seed by the next time we all podcast together.
Love it.
Works for me.
Of course, they're definitely going to go 2-1 now because Kyle's usually right.
They're going to go 0-3, 100%. 0-3 or 2-1. There is no in between.
Oh boy.
Well, it's good to see you guys again. It's good to have Bucks basketball back in our lives. I hope people enjoy that the podcast is back. I hope everyone is enjoying that Bucks basketball is back. Brewhoop.com, go there. We're going to be doing game coverage. We've got all the usual great articles, Monday Morning Media Roundup. Make sure you're following us on Twitter. Kyle's obviously always doing great tweets during the games and not during the games. Usually put some people on blast in really polite ways, which is great. So stay tuned. Thanks so much for listening. Hopefully you're still listening after the hiatus. If you are, we really do appreciate it. It means a lot. So thanks again for listening. Talk to you again soon.
Did he just leave?
Yep, he definitely just left.
That's awesome.